If there's one thing that has defined the games of the past decade, it's the open-world subgenre. Thanks to a new generation of both consoles and PC hardware, developers have been able to create open worlds that boast not only their size but also their beauty, whereas in the 2000s, detail and scale were mutually exclusive. In short, in the past decade, players were literally pelted with sandboxes. Most projects from new game franchises like Watch Dogs to classic series like Metal Gear Solid sooner or later put aside the linear equation, taking on the creation of vast worlds, which is why compiling this list was a challenge for us. Let's be honest, over the decades, even the very notion of an open-world game has undergone far too much change. Let's be clear right away that we didn't take into account wide linear games like God of War, Dark Souls, and Metro Exodus and open-world races. Also, we judge games not only by their quality, but also by their ability to take advantage of the space in which players are immersed. Now let's get started. Mafia 2. When Mafia 2 saw the light, it received a huge amount of negative feedback. Many people didn't like that the long-awaited sequel had an open world, but it wasn't a sandbox. Players getting into a great reproduction of Manhattan in the 40s, they could not do what and when they wanted, they could not participate in any additional classes and secondary missions. No, the world of Second Mafia served more as a backdrop for the story written by the screenwriter, with all other aspects of the genre simply absent. But let's look at it from the other side. The developers created another chapter. Crime epic, but at the same time it didn't try to copy GTA, and that is the most important thing. Instead, Mafia 2 focused on the story of the killer, the life of an aspiring criminal, and the gorgeous missions. Mafia 2 was a great game that should be praised rather than criticized for not being a copy of another franchise, Batman Arkham City. Even if you think that after Batman Arkham Asylum Rocksteady shouldn't have discarded the Metroidvania-style level design, the open world of Arkham City was still a huge achievement for the studio. The guys at Rocksteady had the perfect balance. Arkham City was simultaneously large enough to allow players to freely travel through the famous city, and small enough to detail everything. Just like in the first game, Arkham City has no unnecessary streets or houses. Everything is in its place and needed for something, so players could immerse themselves in the Batman universe. Here you are soaring over the rooftops and then diving into the road to beat up a whole bunch of thugs. That would be interesting at all time. Add to this the secondary missions, which are just as good as the main ones, and a great story. So Arkham City may well be called the best game in the entire franchise, but know that you will really feel like the very real Batman in it. Far Cry 3. The first Far Cry that was released in 2004 was a very innovative game. Moreover, it can be called one of the founders of open-world game. Far Cry 2 sequel was supposed to compete with it, but failed because of repetitive missions. Developing Far Cry 3, Ubisoft decided to give the franchise its name back, and they succeeded in creating one of the most exciting first-person shooters of the decade. The events of Far Cry 3 game took place in the middle of tropical island, and that time it was something brand new. The gameplay and story were not outstanding, but magnificent plot and awesome shootings were worth the time. What's more, Buzz Montenegro became one of the best video game villains. And all thanks to the gorgeous acting of Michael Mondo. It was thanks to his efforts that we could endure such a boring protagonist as Jason Brody. Fallout 4. For some, Fallout 4 was a disappointment because it wasn't as good as Fallout 3, but that doesn't mean that Fallout 4 itself is a bad game. Fallout 4 made the post-apocalyptic retro-futurism more vivid and colorful, and its events unfolded among a delightful copy of Boston, where you had to find a lot of secrets, kill a lot of people, and explore a whole mountain of interesting locations. At least Fallout 4 boasts the title of the most diverse sandbox from Bethesda. Gone are the days of Oblivion, when the studio made the dungeon by copy. In their place came the unique locations that through their environment served intriguing stories. You can spend hundreds of hours traveling through the dreadful Boston wasteland, enjoying the improved combat system, charming companions, and the story, which, although it corresponds to the standard Bethesda, is not enough stars from the Assassin's Creed Odyssey. After a short break, Assassin's Creed has become relevant again thanks to the release of Origins. A game that not only meets the high standards of the series, but also boasts decent RPG mechanics. Nevertheless, Origins was just a sample before the development of Odyssey, whose story takes place in ancient Greece. Moreover, Odyssey managed to become even more than its predecessor. However, we must admit that Odyssey takes more quantity than quality. But the game has some good aspects. for which we are ready to forgive her repetitive quests that are more like a pure green than meaningful tasks. However, as you would expect from the Assassin's Creed franchise, the best aspect of the game was the world of ancient Greece. Not only nice to look at, but also one in which to have fun. Death Stranding. The game came out just recently and there is no doubt a lot of controversy surrounding it, but let's be honest, Kojima has found a uniquely interesting approach to the open world. You could say that the true title of Death Stranding should be Go and Fetch. But the most important thing about Sony's high-profile time exclusive is precisely the journey, not the destination. To begin with, the very idea of traveling across America seems impossible. A vast, hostile wilderness stretches out in front of you, and at first, connecting even two settlements requires an enormous amount of effort. Nevertheless, it is the way the player begins to explore the world around them that makes the project so fascinating. What once seemed so big becomes small and accessible. Creating your own network of ziplines and bridges, taking advantage of other players' constructions, you truly feel like you are moving further and further away without even seeing the other travelers in person. You have the feeling that you are not alone, you are working together. Spider-Man. Making New York interesting is not an easy task. This statement may sound strange, because the events of many games unfold in this city, but partly so. Many gamers have already got bored with New York, they have walked its streets many times, visited Times Squares, and tried their best to climb the top of the Empire State Building, and for the game about Spider-Man it is twice as important. Insomniac proved that they can make good old New York City exciting, in spite of the fact that all the stamps of Spider-Man games remained unchanged. The developers managed to reach such a level of detail that even the most unassuming assassins seem really alive. It was enough to add the locations literally torn from the Marvel Universe, and here you finally get the game about Spider-Man, which is interesting even if you go down to the ground, instead of hovering over the cardboard buildings, built as if in copycat, which remained in the past. Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. Not only was it the first open-world game in the series, but it was also Hideo Kojima's first project in the genre, and guess what? It was a marriage made in heaven. The tactical approach to stealth blossomed into a sandbox world. Throughout the 50 hours of planning and filtering escape from enemy bases remained irresistible. Thanks to the smoothness of the Fox engine, the stealth approach was as good as full-scale firefights. The game forced you to improvise as you went along, coming up with new strategies as enemies adapted to your tactics, so the game never descended into a monotonous repetition of itself. Of course the gaps between missions weren't as vivid, but you could easily close your eyes to them, because you were free to act as you wanted whenever you encountered an enemy. In case you didn't know, MGS5 wasn't even finished. But even what Kojima did manage to create is of such high quality that the unfinished project becomes head and shoulders above most other open-world games. Horizon Zero Dawn. Like MGS5, Horizon was also the first attempt to create an open-world game, but this time for Guerrilla Studio, and they did a brilliant job. Before that the developers created only linear first-person shooters. But they managed to prove that a few years of hard work were not in vain. Zero Dawn became the original project that obviously demonstrates the studio's potential. Horizon was a mix of future technologies and classic fantasy, making the world familiar and alien at the same time, and its secrets were eagerly awaited for their disclosure. Like the real ecosystem, everything in this game's world is brilliantly balanced. Eloy feels like an integral part of the world, she's someone between prey and predator. Whether you're climbing a sheer cliff, hunting, or traveling through the game's world, Horizon will take you on a fascinating journey. The cycle of exploring and confronting robot dinosaurs, each with their own unique behaviors, always hints that you should approach the game wisely. An endless sense of wonder and dread keeps you playing, no matter what you do. An open world that adapts to everyone's interests, a combat system that never gets boring, and an intriguing protagonist only adds to it. The more time you spend here, the less you want to leave this game. Some players even call Horizon Zero Dawn the most important Sony game on the current console generation, and the sequel may be even better, Red Dead Redemption. Even though there were already several Western games before Red Dead Redemption, now they all resemble demos of the famous Rockstar project. The first RDR wasn't just an amazement to the Wild West, but saw a terrific thrilling shooter story told with the sophistication and attention to detail that you would well expect from the creator of GTA. I think it's a game especially because of the legacy it left behind in the first place. Rockstar could have easily made GTA with horses, but they took a different path. Yes, the developers carried over some elements from their other franchises. But at the same time, Red Dead was a big step forward for the studio. Marked the transition from anarchic projects, where the player completely decided what and how to do, to the author's story, which determined the way forward for the entire series. The narrative also became a head-turner. In RDR, it was primarily defined by its restraint and the desire to show the characters as real people living in the midst of this magnificent copy of the Wild West. Fallout New Vegas. New Vegas is still one of the greatest RPGs of all time. And when it first came out, not many people paid attention to it. At first, New Vegas was full of bugs, both funny and those that made you want to cry and scream. Therefore, the spin-off developed by Obsidian received a lot of negative feedback at first. And the reason for it was huge ambitions, which literally made the game so huge. New Vegas was positioned as a minor plug game, which was far from the major projects of Bethesda. But in fact, the famous spin-off shut them all down, thanks to its fantastic multi-layered storytelling, elaborate faction system, the ability for the player to make decisions that went far beyond a choice between good and bad answers. Yes, the game is not without its flaws, but the journey through the Mayhovian wasteland under the Big Iron made New Vegas unique. There won't be another Fallout like this, and that's a matter of whether it's good or bad. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. The game is direct proof of how flexible and diverse open-world games can be. The Hyrule version of Breath of the Wild is considered one big level, and compared to Death Stranding, the journey here is far more important than the destination. The mechanics are simple, but they fit together so that no two players in the world will pass this exclusive in the same way. Many games make you feel like an adventurer, but few do it as well as Nintendo's masterpiece. A hostile world wants you dead, but step by step you conquer it. From the lush fields at the start of the game, to the volcanic mountains you find yourself in hours later. You are free to explore this special world however you want. If you want, you can try to fight the final boss at the very beginning of the game, because Nintendo trusts you to make decisions to explore at your own pace and conquer this world whenever and however you want, while having tons of fun in the process. The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. You've probably played Skyrim. Maybe not only on PC or consoles, but also on your fridge, toaster, smart speaker, because Bethesda just can't stop, and time after time they release Skyrim on everything that has any semblance of a gaming platform, to make the most of it. The jokes are joking, and they say Skyrim is an immortal game, but Bethesda is creating new versions for a reason, because people want to play more and more. Even after you have passed it 100 times, you will find something to surprise. Often the most striking moments occur in moments of calm. You bypass the snow-covered mountain that you unsuccessfully tried to climb, and the dark sky flickers green. Here in the distance you see the wreckage of a ship, and you immediately wonder what awaits you there. That's what video games are all about. GTA 5. The fifth part is the most successful in the history of 6 years. Rockstar's epic masterpiece brought the studio $6 billion, surpassing even the highest-grossing Avengers finale movie by a factor of 2. Heck, it's hard for me to even imagine such a sum. Of course, profit and popularity don't always mean quality, but GTA 5 deserves its success. At one time it was the most ambitious game the developers had ever made. 3 playable characters and a huge sandbox that most modern players know more about than the streets where they grew up. It was released on last-generation consoles, but in its scale and quality of all its aspects, it can compete with modern projects. Needless to say about the multiplayer, from which a huge fanbase has not been able to tear itself away for 6 years. First of all, due to the fact that Rockstar's Los Santos is perfect for any game mode. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. It's no exaggeration to say that the third The Witcher changed the world. The first 2 games definitely have their fans. But it was Wild Hunt that brought the whole series into the mainstream. In part because it unlocked the full potential of non-gen consoles. An RPG of such immense scope accounted for the player's every decision, while allowing them the freedom to explore the beautiful, detail-filled world that is usually characteristic of linear games. At the time, this was simply unthinkable. The Witcher 3 is no longer a novelty, but that doesn't mean its world can't be considered one of the most exciting. There is always something fascinating about Geralt's journey, no matter what you do, hunting monsters, walking through the main plot trying to stop a wild hunt, or chatting with an interesting NPC who broke into the life of the famous Witcher of Rivia for just a few minutes. Moreover, not one part of the surrounding world is not perceived as just a scenery. Everything matters, everything has its own story. You just have to find out which one. Red Dead Redemption 2. Undoubtedly, the open world of Red Dead Redemption 2 is the most realistic one that has ever existed in the video games. The cities and towns, the wild nature breathes with life, and even if it is quite measured and ordinary. After all, unlike the spaghetti westerns, people are not involved in constant gunfights, but simply go about their business. Red Dead finds beauty in this ordinary life. The sequel tells the story of a dying era when America is on the verge of transitioning into modernity that will leave many people behind, including the outlaw gang you are a part of. The fuse is already lit, but the methodical gameplay of RDR2 makes sure that it burns for as long as possible, and at the end you'll have the inevitable explosion that sows chaos. For this reason, the project won't suit everyone, but it doesn't care. It has its own unique vision, served through the eyes of one of the best video game protagonists in history. So dear friends, you've seen our modest selection of open world games, and there are no winners or losers here. Now it's your turn to share your favorite open world games that came out during this decade. And let's be kinder to each other, as we respect all opinions without exception. Also be sure to subscribe to our channel and click on the likes and bells to see you on Gaming Vibe. Watch and play with us.